I'm thinking this really is an extraordinary group, as you are going to see in my presentation as I move forward. You're already doing many of the things, making many of the changes, and looking at some of the more significant events that need to occur in sales as we go forward in the post-pandemic era. Let's begin with a little audience participation. Finish this sentence for me, if you would. If I always do what I've always done, I'll have less than I've ever had before. There was a time when we could say, if I always do what I've always done, I'll always get what I've always got. Those days are over. Your industry is going to move ahead, as you are seeing. Processes are going to continue to change, as you have seen. Technologies are going to continue to upgrade, as you have seen. So the idea that we can maintain our place in society, maintain our place in the market, maintain our place in the industry or in the customer's mind, those days are over. Every sales call is an audition for the next one. If I continue doing what I've always done, I can only go backwards. I don't want to confuse your life, but there's a new role for the CEO, and that's the CSO, the Chief Sales Officer. And I'll explain that in some detail later. And as if your job wasn't hard enough, now you're having to juggle and figure out how you can work through this maze that we're going through now in this post-pandemic era. Your people are watching you. I'm going to emphasize this. Your people are watching you. You see, none of us know who to listen to. We can't trust the press. We can't trust the physicians. We can't trust the politicians as if we ever could. And we can't even trust our pastors anymore because the world is changing so rapidly, and we're hearing one person say it's black and one person say it's white. We don't really know where to look. How many of your employees, how many of your direct reports and your other employees look to you for guidance in areas outside of your business functions? This is one of the critical roles that CEOs are playing today. The ideas that I've heard shared this morning already are actually extraordinary. They're deeper, they're broader, they're wider than what I typically hear. And so I want you to continue to encourage each other. And when you listen to another member of this group talk about doing things like supply chain selling, I don't sell to my customer, I sell through my customer. And maybe I sell 2 or 3 levels down. When you hear that kind of information, ask yourself, is this something we need to consider? The answer is yes. And then how can we go about capitalizing on that concept? We're looking at things like sales analytics, which are going to a whole different level now. And as we look at the changes that are happening in sales, we have to ask ourselves, what will we do differently? And that's why I'm here this morning. I don't have answers for you, but I have some ideas that might stimulate an idea in your mind. I believe that whenever 2 minds come together, a third mind is created. Whenever 2 minds come together, a third mind is created. And it's that third idea that's the next new thing. That's the best of ideas. That's the opportunity for going forward. So as I go through the content this morning, you will hear some things that you totally reject, and that's just fine. You'll hear some things that you used to know and used to do, but somehow or other they got put up on the shelf, and we haven't done those lately. But you will also hear some things that you can use to go forward. But here's the kicker. What you hear is different from what I say. What people hear is different from what we say. What people hear is more important than what we say. And now that we're doing so much of our selling virtually, we need to be conscious of what the customer is hearing, not necessarily what we are saying. We want to make sure that we touch the customer as well as we can and as often as we can. By show of hands, how many of you are in sales? Could I see your hands? There are 2 types of people in the world, those that know they're in sales and those that don't. So let's try that again. How many of you are in sales? And how many of you are in customer service? And how many of your employees would raise their hands if I asked them that question? Can an entry-level employee in your organization chase off your best account? And maybe with all good intentions. So we want to look at how we change our focus in sales going forward and how we can modify what we are teaching our people. The single most important function of sales is to teach. The single most important function of management is to teach. The single most important function at the leadership level is to teach. It's not your job to do. It's your job to clone yourself, to put confidence and competence in the hands of your people so that they can pick up the ball and run with it. Some of you are fighting government regulation. Oh my gosh. One of the Chuckisms that I live by is no person should be allowed to run for public office until they've had to meet payroll. If they've walked the floor Thursday night trying to figure out how they're going to pay the employees on Friday, they are qualified. But unfortunately, you and I are guilty of putting attorneys, people without true business knowledge and experience, into those positions, and they simply don't know any better. And that's changing now. We're seeing now that the politicians are beginning to say, whoa, all this debt stuff, we can't manage that. All these riots and changes that are happening, no one could predict the COVID. So now they're beginning to turn to people like you, and they're asking for advice. The ones that aren't asking, of course, are going to be the greatest losers. The ones that are asking are going to be the greatest winners. So that's my philosophy going into sales. Frankly, I don't believe in the price objection. How long do you have to stay in sales before you hear the price objection? One customer. The price objection is rarely, if ever, valid. A Chuckism that I put on your handout, those of you that have one, Chuckism number 6 is the one that I live by. In the history of recorded time, no customer has ever said, your price is too high, and meant it. When the customer mouths the words, your price is too high, what is the customer really trying to say? I don't perceive the cost as equal to the value. I don't think my problem is as expensive as your solution. There's dozens of things they're trying to say. And if we just hear your price is too high and all I know how to do is to cut my price, that's the only alternative that I have. So what can you teach your people that will help them go to the next level? In value-added selling, there are 7 levels. At the lower levels, we learn how to overcome the price objection, but at the higher levels, we learn how to eliminate the price objection. What would it be worth to you and your people to never hear the price objection again? So I'm going to move into some content that'll run right up to the break, I believe, maybe a little bit beyond. We will stop, take a break, and then I'm going to have a session of Q&I, not Q&A, but Q&I. Q&A would imply that I have the answers. I don't. I have some ideas. That's why I call it Q&I. If you take your response to a circumstance, situation, issue, problem, and someone else's response and put those two together, that's 2 minds coming together. And there could be a new idea there. There could be yet another way of solving the problem. And just for the record, my favorite compliment, you made me think. My favorite compliment is when someone says, you made me think. I'm going to launch a PowerPoint and do a presentation within a presentation. So I'm going to ask you to go full screen and if possible, delete, except for Bob, delete the icons of the screens of the other people so that you can see the entire screen. When we're presenting virtually, there's a different dynamic between the salesperson and the customer. There's a different dynamic between the salesperson and the customer. The primary dynamic that changes is something called sensory selling. Sensory selling. What are the 5 senses? As quickly as you can, name the 5 senses. Most people can name 3, they're slow on the 4th, and you have to think a minute about the 5. But the 5 senses can actually be illustrated in our face. There is hearing, and there's sight, and there's smell, and there's taste, and there's touch. So how many of those senses do we typically use in a face-to-face sales call? You see, in face-to-face, why do we carry donuts on a sales call? Because there's the aroma of donuts. In the Remax world, if you're doing an open house, why not bake some cookies as you've learned? Then we get taste and smell. So we want to have as much sensory experience in our sales calls as possible. But when we're doing virtual sales calls, that becomes an impossibility. We only have sight and sound. And too many virtual calls today are being done telephone only. And that way we only have one of the senses, and that's sound. We can hear intonation in the voice, we can hear choice of words, but it changes the way we communicate with our customers. So as I go through this content, I'm going to do a presentation within a presentation, and what I'm doing here is showing you a PowerPoint capability. If I were in the room with you, I would give this remote to one of you and let you drive the PowerPoint. Let you drive the PowerPoint. 3 key words I want you to think about in virtual selling. The first one is interaction, which is what I could stimulate here. The second one is outcome. What is the customer's desired outcome? And that's changing. And then the number 3. You could write the word 3 or the number 3. With those 3 essential elements, you can work your way through improving your virtual selling. Yesterday, I added another word to it, and that word is division. It turns out that we're seeing our country become divided. Obviously, it's always been divided, 2 parties, etc. And now divisions within the parties and divisions within families. Somebody said this is worse than the war between the states. No, it isn't. See, Bob and I know it wasn't the Civil War. There was nothing civil about it. We know it was the war between the states. We see our country becoming divided, organizations becoming divided, so yet another task for you as the CEO and CSO is cohesion. Getting all of the cats marching in the same direction, at least, if not at the same velocity. The way this process works is I put the issues up on the table. If I were doing a sales call, maybe where it says overview, it would say quality, and maybe where it says outcome, it would say profitability. And I would ask the customer which of these is most important to you and let them click on it.